Imagine this. You find yourself in a room brimming with chatter, laughter crackling like static in the air, a cocktail of overlapping voices weaving a tapestry of distraction. Yet, despite the noise, your mind feels noisier still, each thought a shard of glass cutting through the din, restless, sharp, relentless. You long not for connection but for silence, not for company but for the void between souls. In this crowded room, your deepest craving is an empty space where you can be alone with the tumult inside you. How can it be that amidst abundance your most profound need is solitude? Is it a craving or a necessity? A paradox looms here. The intelligent mind, celebrated for its social prowess and verbal agility, turns away from the crowd. It retreats, seeking what everyone else fears, the stillness of solitude. Why is this so? Why do those who think deeply, who analyze the infinite complexities of existence, often choose to walk paths less traveled, solitary, silent, invisible? It might seem counterintuitive. After all, intelligence is often equated with engagement, dialogue, exchange. We imagine brilliant minds illuminating the world with their thoughts, shared freely and widely in the marketplace of ideas. But what if the true crucible of intelligence lies not in the noise of many voices, but in the quiet sanctuary of one? What if the moments we treasure for connection are built upon the invisible foundations forged in deliberate solitude? You might wonder, is solitude a refuge or a form of exile? Is it the retreat of the fearful mind or the deliberate act of the courageous? Here is a tension embedded beneath the surface of every intelligent soul's journey. Solitude can be a sanctuary, a cathedral of thought where ideas are born and nurtured. Yet it can also be a desert, a place of isolation where the mind gnaws on questions, tormented by its own depth. To embrace solitude is to invite paradox into your life, to flirt with both the creative and the crippling. How, then, can such a fragile balance be maintained? How do intelligent minds avoid the abyss that solitude might open beneath their feet? Perhaps it is because intelligence itself is not simply a gift, but a burden. To think deeply is to live with the stark awareness of contradictions, to see the fractures beneath the surface of apparent truths, to wrestle with the unknown and the unknowable. To be intelligent means to perceive the vastness of existence and the minuteness of one's own place within it. Such insight breeds loneliness, an existential solitude that no conversation can fully dispel. Is this why intelligent minds instinctively seek out solitude? To wrestle silently with these unbearable questions, to find a private forum where complexity can breathe without simplification or distraction. And yet there is something almost terrifying about solitude. It reveals what society's noise often masks, the raw contours of your own psyche, the shadows lurking beneath your facade. In solitude, you are forced to confront the paradoxes within yourself, great strength and deep vulnerability, clarity and confusion, confidence and self-doubt. Can you face yourself without the crutch of distraction? Can you endure the silence when it becomes thunderous? Or does the intelligent mind's retreat into solitude demand a kind of fortitude few possess? Another question arises, piercing and urgent. Why does society resist solitude so vehemently? Our culture reveres connection, community, constant engagement. Social media maps the terrain of shared experiences, while the fear of being alone feels like a universal dread. Yet paradoxically, it is the brightest minds who often cleave away from this collective frenzy. Do they see, with painful clarity, that constant interaction dulls the edge of thought? That depth is suffocated by superficial chatter. What happens to wisdom, creativity, and insight when the mind is perpetually distracted? Could it be that solitude is not a luxury, but a necessity for the mind's flourishing? Imagine, then, the intelligent mind as both a spark and a flame, fragile yet fierce, requiring oxygen but also protected from the wild winds of distraction. Solitude is the shelter that allows the flame to burn steady, to cast its light deeper and farther. But solitude also isolates. The flame can flicker and almost die in the darkness if unkind winds blow. What delicate craft does the intelligent mind practice to balance this? How do you harness solitude without becoming lost within it? As you sit with these questions, notice the tension in your own breath, the simultaneous pull toward the world and the silent, shadowed places where your thoughts are allowed to ruminate freely. This tension is not incidental. It is the very crucible of intelligence itself. The paradox that you feel uneasily within is the space where insight is born, where the self is both fragmented and whole. So, where does this restless pull toward solitude lead? Is it a path toward illumination or a winding road to despair? How does the intelligent mind navigate the labyrinth of its own making, seeking solitude yet fearing it, needing it yet doubting its worth? This is not merely a question of temperament or habit. It is a philosophical and psychological journey into the nature of thought, consciousness, and existence itself. Soon, you will glimpse the contours of this journey in more detail, the hidden mechanics of why solitude is embraced by those whose minds do not rest, whose curiosity demands silence in order to be heard. You will come face to face with the paradox of connection and isolation, creation and destruction, courage and vulnerability. The answers will not be simple, but to understand this paradox fully is to understand a vital truth about the human condition, and perhaps about yourself. Hold on to this restless tension. Your voyage into the heart of solitude as the sanctuary of the intelligent mind is just beginning. You might wonder why the mind, when most capable and vibrant, turns instinctively toward solitude, as if drawn by an invisible magnet to an internal exile. What force could be powerful enough to pull the restless intellect away from the clamorous world of human interaction, away from the immediate warmth of voices, laughs, and shared experience, into the quiet, unfamiliar corridors of isolation? This is not a whimsical preference. It is a tremor beneath the surface of your psyche, a deep current shaped by ancient philosophical riddles and modern psychological revelations alike. Peek beneath the veneer of daily distractions, and you encounter the complex architecture of the human mind, a machine built not only for thought, but for solitary confrontation with itself. Carl Jung, the mystic psychologist who wrestled with the shadows of the unconscious, described this tension as the process of individuation, an arduous journey toward becoming whole, which demands a solitude that is neither absence nor loneliness, but a sacred space where the self can meet itself without masks or diversions. In Jung's view, the soul's true work often occurs in silence, in rooms where echoes answer only to the solitary thinker. This is not merely a retreat. It is a forging ground for identity, a crucible where the fractured parts of you collide and eventually coalesce. But what makes this solitude necessary? Why is it more than an escape or a caprice? Friedrich Nietzsche, whose sharp insight cut through societal complacency, might suggest that the intelligent mind is condemned to solitude because it inhabits a higher plane of awareness, too sensitive to the banalities and hypocrisies of social convention, too restless to settle for easy answers. His eternal truth echoes in the loneliness of the philosopher who stands apart, understanding that the crowd often demands conformity where the spirit demands freedom. Nietzsche's solitary thinker is not isolated by accident. He is isolated by necessity, a byproduct of piercing vision that sees through the masks others wear with ease. Think also of Arthur Schopenhauer, whose pessimism casts a darker shadow on the human condition. To him, society is a disruptive force, a chaotic cacophony drowning the subtle melodies of introspection. Intellectually acute individuals sense this immediately and instinctively recoil, retreating into solitude as a form of self-preservation. The world's noise becomes not an accompaniment but an assault, one that must be silenced if the mind is to hear its own symphony. This perspective is grim, but it underlines a crucial truth. Solitude is not always a choice, but sometimes a shield against overwhelming sensory and emotional bombardment. Aldous Huxley, chronicler of inner landscapes and altered states, sharpened this insight from another angle. He understood that solitude opens doorways to inner realms, places inaccessible in the superficial rush of social existence. Through solitude, the mind approaches what Huxley called the spiritual experience, not necessarily religious, but a profound dissolution of the self's boundaries, a confrontation with the mysterious, ineffable core of being. Here, solitude becomes sacred, necessary for those whose intelligence thirsts for more than empirical knowledge and demands the mystical or ineffable dimensions of life. The mind, when free from external stimulus, can wander into territories that shape creativity, insight, and transformation. Even more unnerving is what Jean-Paul Sartre unveiled about this solitude, the contradiction of the self eternally aware yet perpetually alienated. His existential philosophy forces you to confront the stark fact that you are condemned to be free, alone in your choices, and ultimately responsible for the meaning you create. The look of the other, the gaze of society, simultaneously defines and imprisons you, yet it is in solitude away from that gaze that authentic freedom begins to flicker. This existential solitude is not merely physical, it is ontological. The recognition that beneath all social roles and performances, you stand alone, nakedly human, confronting the abyss of your own existence. The intelligence that grasps this paradox recoils from easy companionship, seeking instead the clarity and courage found in solitary reflection. Viktor Frankl, whose tragic yet hopeful wisdom was forged in the furnaces of Auschwitz, added yet another layer. His logotherapy posits that the human spirit, especially the spiritually or intellectually sensitive, is compelled to find meaning even in suffering. Solitude, then, can become a refuge not of despair, but of profound purpose. It is in the silent wrestling with one's internal demons, away from the soothing distractions of social life, that the individual discovers what truly matters, what anchors existence beyond the fleeting tides of pleasure and pain. This solitude is not emptiness but a fulcrum for meaning, a silent space where the soul declares, "I will endure, I will create, I will transcend." When you recognize these forces, Jung's individuation, Nietzsche's alienation, Schopenhauer's shielding, Huxley's transcendence, Sartre's existential freedom, and Frankl's search for meaning, you begin to see solitude not as a mere respite, but as a profound psychological necessity for enlightened minds. It is the terrain where identity is sculpted out of chaos and where the restless, overactive mind finds a rare peace. Yet this solitude is charged with paradox. It is both balm and blade, sanctuary and crucible. It can heal, but it can also isolate. It can illuminate, but it can also estrange. You may ask, how does this hidden force ripple into your daily life, your emotions, your behaviors? It manifests in subtle ways: the impatience with small talk, the discomfort in crowds, the intense need for silence after intense social interaction. It surfaces as a strange hunger for alone time even when loneliness threatens, as a compulsion to dive deep into thought while the world demands shallow engagement. Your identity itself can feel split, part craving engagement, part craving retreat. Recognizing this ambivalence is vital, for it hints at a profound psychological schism, a polarity that all intelligent minds wrestle with but few articulate. And the stakes of this tension are high. Ignore the call of solitude and the mind becomes fragmented, overwhelmed by external stimuli, trapped in the superficial swirl of distraction. Embrace it without caution, and isolation may become a prison, a retreat into narcissism or despair. The intelligent mind exists precariously on this knife's edge, where solitude is both the source of insight and the risk of alienation. The consequences stretch far beyond mere preference. They shape the trajectory of identity, creativity, and even sanity itself. So as you sit with this unveiling, sense the silent gravity pulling you inward, and acknowledge the parallel force that tugs you outward toward connection. Both are vital, yet the hidden power of solitude lies in its ability to give birth to something unseen within, a deeper self, a sharper intellect, a more authentic being. The paradox remains. The very brilliance of your mind demands withdrawal, yet your humanity demands contact. This is the secret crucible where the intelligent mind is forged, and soon, you will explore its contours further, discovering how this solitude can be both your greatest ally and your gravest challenge. There's a silent architect shaping the contours of your inner and outer worlds, an unseen hand molding how you think, feel, and relate. It operates beneath the surface, whispering its scripts, defining what feels normal, what is deemed productive, what counts as connection or success. This invisible force is the convergence of cognitive bias, neurological wiring, and cultural imprinting. And it quietly chains you in a maze where solitude feels suspicious, even dangerous, while ceaseless social noise masquerades as necessity. Consider this. Your brain, marvelously complex as it is also a relentless pattern seeker, a survival machine shaped by millennia of evolution. Its very architecture favors immediacy, quick judgments, rapid emotional feedback, social validation. Neurological pathways reinforce this over and over, with the dopamine circuits lighting up when you receive a message notification, a smile, a fleeting acknowledgement from others. This chemical reward system is not just biological wiring, it is a trapdoor, urging you away from stillness and into the cacophony of external stimuli. The more you swim in shallow crowds, the more the brain reinforces that crowded, noisy environment as safe. But what of the depths, those uncharted waters of prolonged solitude and quiet thought? They send weaker signals, are harder to navigate, and can even feel threatening. This leads to an insidious paradox. Your mind, wired to seek connection, simultaneously harbors a hunger for solitude, a hunger that, if sated, unlocks profound creativity and clarity. But the louder the world shouts, the more your brain is trained to distrust that hunger. It's a subtle form of cognitive bias, a social conditioning bias that skews your perception. Solitude gets reframed as loneliness, inactivity as failure, silence as absence or loss. The noise becomes the baseline. To step away from it is to risk being labeled other, aloof, or worse, broken. And so, without realizing it, the intelligent mind becomes ensnared in this social web, its most fertile ground deprived of sunlight. Cultural conditioning deepens the shadow. Imagine growing up in a society where extroversion is celebrated as the ideal, where the always-on mentality is applauded, where standing out requires being seen and heard noisily. In this symphony, the player who chooses a quieter instrument is often mistaken for being out of tune or disengaged. Schools push group work over independent study. Workplaces prize teamwork and constant collaboration over solitary reflection. Social media fuels the illusion that visibility equals worth, engagement equals success. These cultural patterns don't just shape habits, they warp the very way your mind values itself and others. The danger here is not only personal but profoundly societal. When intelligent minds, those accustomed to deep thought and complexity, are herd-driven toward constant distraction, what colors the collective consciousness? Shallow conversations, polarized debates, surface-level creativity. The erosion of the reflective space means innovation is stifled not by lack of intelligence but by lack of mental room to breathe. The collective intelligence, the shared cultural wisdom, dims because its brightest sparks are never allowed to flicker clearly in solitude. Instead, they smolder under pressure, trying to fit into the noisy mold. For society, this means a growing disconnect from nuance, from wisdom accrued through silent struggle, from the patient unfolding of ideas that only solitude nurtures. But why do you, consciously or unconsciously, stay trapped in this cycle? One reason lies in the availability heuristic. a cognitive shortcut where the brain prioritizes information that is most immediate and frequent. Because social feedback is constant and instant, it drowns out the slow drip of inner insight. You begin to believe that your value and thoughts are only as good as their reception by others. The internal dialogue, rich with possibilities and introspection, gets sidelined because it fails to produce quick wins. Every ping, every like, every social nudge recalibrates your internal compass toward the external. The neurological impacts extend further. Prolonged exposure to social noise can reduce your brain's capacity for sustained focus, a phenomenon reflected in the shrinking attention span across generations. This is not merely anecdotal but supported by neuroscience. When the prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex reasoning and executive control, is overwhelmed by constant stimuli, it struggles to maintain the integrity of deep thought. The cognitive resources you have for reflection, for problem solving, for creativity erode like soil under relentless erosion. You become a reactive entity rather than a thoughtful one, perpetually caught in the cycle of stimulus and response. And yet the paradox intensifies. Your intelligence is precisely what heightens your sensitivity to this turmoil. You can see the patterns, the irony, the cost of distraction. You recognize the price of superficial engagement but find yourself caught in it anyway, not from lack of will, but because the neural and cultural forces are invisible and relentless. This is no simple matter of choice. It is a profound shape-shifting of consciousness itself. You wrestle daily with the urge to pull away, to retreat into that rich interior landscape, even as invisible chains bind your attention outward. The gravity of this unseen trap becomes clearer when you consider what is lost in the process. Not just fleeting moments of peace, but the very soil from which identity grows, from which authentic creativity blooms, from which true understanding emerges. Solitude is not mere absence of others. It is the presence of self in its most expansive form. When you cannot find refuge there, you risk losing touch with your own depths. The dark waters that, once navigated, reveal hidden treasures. The existential urgency is palpable. Without this refuge, the mind fractures further, identity splinters, and the light of insight dims under the relentless glare of distraction. But you haven't yet reached the core of this enigma, that breakthrough moment when the paradox resolves and something profound awakens. For now, sense the tension tightening like a web around your cognition and culture, pulling you toward the noise even as your soul screams for silence. Feel the trembling between two worlds, one that demands your constant external performance, the other that craves your silent inward journey. The next step lies just beyond this chasm, waiting to be crossed with courage and clarity. What if everything you believed about connection and progress, the relentless chase for external validation, the constant noise of productivity and social engagement, were precisely the chains that constrict your mind? Imagine, for a moment, that the very features of modern life you accepted as pillars of success and intelligence are, in fact, the cage bars of your own undoing. The intellectual freedom you crave is not found in more data, more dialogue, or more distraction. It's found in the deliberate act of severing ties, if only temporarily, from the world's clamoring urgencies. This is not a retreat born of weakness or fear. It is a radical reclamation of power. To embrace solitude, to carve out a sanctuary of silence, is to stand at the edge of a precipice and leap not outward into chaos, but inward into a universe hidden beneath the surface of your own mind. The paradox here is dizzying. To connect more deeply with the world, you must first disconnect from it. To hear the grand symphony of ideas, you must first endure the deafening silence. This principle upends every cultural axiom about productivity, collaboration, and happiness. Think of the minds history has chosen as revolutionaries, philosophers, artists, and scientists, those who burned brightest not because they drowned in constant exchange, but because they mastered the art of solitude. Nikola Tesla, a man whose innovations electrified the world, spent long hours alone, immersed in visions that thrived only in isolation. Virginia Woolf, wrestling with the tumultuous demands of society, found that her most profound insights sprouted from solitary walks and quiet rooms where her consciousness could wander unfettered. Isaac Newton, retreating from public life during the plague years, produced some of the most groundbreaking work of all time. These were not social butterflies. They were architects of inner worlds, builders of mental cathedrals erected in rooms of silence. Why did they choose solitude when their contemporaries chose the spotlight? Because they understood a secret that society still refuses to admit. The raw material of genius is not external stimuli, but undistracted, unfettered attention. Solitude is the crucible in which complex ideas coagulate and strengthen. It is the space where the mind can disentangle itself from the superficial webs of social performance and dive deep into the labyrinth of thought, unearthing connections no one saw coming. But this is not about romanticizing loneliness or suggesting you shut out the world forever. It is a call to invert your relationship with external demands. Instead of being a slave to the ceaseless barrage of notifications, meetings, and conversations, you become the sovereign of your own mental realm. You create sanctuaries within, intervals where you control the narrative, where your mind wanders and wrestles with its own shadows and sparks. In this domain, your thoughts are not fragmented bits tossed at others like confetti but molten streams molded into coherent, powerful currents. The shift begins with reconfiguring what solitude means. It is not mere isolation or absence. It is intentional presence with yourself. It is a dialogue without interruption, a confrontation with your inner chaos, and the patient cultivation of your own ideas, unpolluted by external noise. Here lies the key. To break free, you must learn to cherish being alone not as a form of punishment, but as a permission slip to explore the infinity inside your head. This mindset shift is less a pause than a recalibration of the essence of thinking itself. The modern myth of hyperconnectivity, that to be intelligent you must be endlessly engaged, crumbles under this light. Instead, intelligence grows in the fertile silences, in the recesses where the mind folds inward on itself and discovers unforeseen patterns. Now, picture yourself stepping into this new paradigm, a mental architecture where solitude is not a void but a charged space. You begin to see the external world not as a relentless tide dragging you under, but as a landscape from which you can step back and choose your engagements. You learn to build rituals that anchor you, moments during the day to retreat from screens, to walk without purpose but with attention, to write without an audience in mind, to sit without needing to produce. These are not indulgences. They are acts of resistance and creation all at once. You are reclaiming control not by adding more to your plate but by subtracting the non-essential, by mastering the discipline of selective presence. This is a revolutionary act in a culture that worships busyness and connectivity as proxies for worth and vitality. You are learning to distinguish between noise that fragments your mind and silence that integrates it. History and science lend weight to this revolution. The practice of solitude has been a cornerstone of wisdom traditions from Stoicism to Zen Buddhism. Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, used solitude to anchor his thoughts amid chaos. The Zen masters teach that by sitting alone, without distraction, one cultivates clarity that no amount of external input can provide. Recent neuroscientific studies reveal that downtime, moments of quiet reflection, enhances creativity, problem-solving, and emotional regulation. Your brain literally rewires itself in the crucible of calm, forging new neural pathways that make complex thinking possible. This knowledge is a gift and a challenge to wield power over your own mind. It demands courage to step away from the glow of screens and the hum of social validation. It demands a radical trust that the richest conversations you will ever have are the ones you hold silently within yourself. It demands faith that the solitary spaces you carve out will produce not emptiness, but a suffusion of insight, clarity, and renewal. You are not a passive victim of the digital storm. You are a pioneer charting a new territory inside your own consciousness, learning to navigate the paradox that to truly engage with the world, you must first turn inward. This inner turning is the most revolutionary act you can perform, for it realigns your mind from reactive noise to reflective power. And so, the question shifts. Will you continue to drift downstream in the flood of distraction, or will you reclaim the helm with solitude as your anchor? You already have the map hidden in your restless questions, your fleeting moments of craving silence. You are on the cusp of a profound transformation, where solitude becomes less an absence and more the radical presence of your truest intelligence. What once seemed like a void now reveals itself as a wellspring. What once felt like loneliness begins to pulse with possibility. In this space, your mind is free to unfold, not as a fragmented jigsaw tossed into the wind, but as a symphony waiting to be composed. The revolution waits inside you, not outside. Will you take the step? You stand at the edge of a precipice, not the precipice of the external world, but the one within, the yawning chasm between who you have been and who you might become. You have wandered through the tempest of distractions, navigated the labyrinth of relentless social noise, and fathomed the quiet depths where your mind dwells alone. Now the final veil lifts, revealing a truth so profound it reframes not only your solitude but the very fabric of reality itself. What if the chaos outside, the relentless torrent of stimuli, opinions, and demands, is not separate from you but merely a reflection of the fractured self you carry within? The noise is not an external assault. It is the echo of a mind unmoored from itself, caught in the frantic pursuit of validation and belonging. And solitude, far from a mere escape, is the crucible in which this fractured self is forged anew. Imagine reality not as a fixed stage on which you act, but as an ever-shifting interplay between your awareness and the world's infinite possibilities. Solitude is the act of stepping back from the puppeteering strings of external forces, releasing the desperate clutch on imagined certainties, and embracing the fluidity of your own consciousness. In this space, time dilates, and the boundaries that once seemed impermeable begin to dissolve. You realize that the world is not something out there, to be conquered or consumed, but a canvas that your inner clarity paints with every thought and perception. Here lies the ultimate paradox. In absolute aloneness, you become the most connected, not through the superficial ties of shared chatter or transient approval, but through a rare, intimate communion with the origin of all meaning, yourself. This is not the solipsism of narcissistic isolation, but the fertile ground where your truest self, unmasked and unshackled, emerges to dance with the infinite. Think of your mind as an ocean, restless and turbulent when buffeted by external noise, but capable of becoming a deep, silent abyss when left undisturbed. It is in that abyss that the most luminous revelations arise, truths that cannot be accessed amid the clamor. The intelligent mind understands this not as an occasional luxury, but as a vital necessity, a sacred pact with the self. To embrace solitude is to surrender to the subtle rhythms beneath the surface, where intuition, creativity, and profound understanding dwell. You may have seen solitude as a void, a deprivation, a punishment inflicted by circumstance or choice. But now you see it as the primordial womb of insight. Each moment alone is a peeling away of layers, societal expectations, mechanized distractions, ingrained fears, until what remains is the raw, iridescent core of your being. This core is not static but dynamic, ever-evolving, and infinitely expansive. It is the seat of your authentic intelligence, capable of perceiving the world with a depth that no conversation or crowd can replicate. What does it mean to possess such intelligence? It means recognizing that your thoughts are not prison bars but gateways. The solitude you once feared transforms into a luminous corridor, leading to new dimensions of understanding. You begin to see the interconnectedness threading through all existence, the way your consciousness ripples outward, shaping reality even as it is shaped by it. This is the secret known by every philosopher who treasured silence, every mystic who sought union beyond speech. The boundary between self and other is an illusion, a veil to be gently lifted through the practice of solitude. Now, the struggles you endured to claim this space, the loneliness, the fear, the societal pressure to conform, appear as necessary rites of passage, the dark nights that must be crossed to witness the dawn. Each hardship was a refining fire, stripping away illusions to reveal something finer and more enduring. Every moment of discomfort was a seed planted in the fertile soil of your interior world, destined to bloom into wisdom. What if this realization, this embrace of your solitude, is not merely your salvation but a beacon for others? The intelligent mind does not isolate simply to escape, but to gather clarity, to cultivate an inner light so brilliant it can guide others through their own darkness. You become a lighthouse, a quiet pulse of presence amidst the storm. Your solitude is not an absence but a profound presence, an invitation, a challenge, a revolution. As the last echoes of distraction fade into the distance, you find yourself looking not outward but deeper within, where the eternal dance of mind and spirit unfolds in endless play. You carry the paradox with you now. Alone, you are never truly lonely. Separated from noise, you are boundlessly connected. The world and your mind are not opposing forces but partners in an intimate waltz. What will you do with this revelation? Will you retreat into safe isolation, or will you step boldly into a new way of being, one that honors the sacred solitude within while engaging the world with newfound depth and courage? The choice is yours, and the stakes have never been higher. Because in the stillness, in the solitary chambers of your consciousness, you hold the power to redefine reality itself, not as a passive observer but as an awakened creator, someone who understands that to change the world, you must first transform the landscape of your own mind. So breathe deeply and listen. The silence is speaking. It is the voice of your most authentic self calling you home, not to an empty void but to the infinite expanse where intelligence, insight, and true freedom converge. Will you answer?